Hiya folks, welcome to the show. Isn't nostalgia amazing? What better way is there to fondly look back at your past while also feeling completely terrible because you realise that you took it all for granted? For instance, do you remember 10 seconds ago when I started making this video? Hiya folks, welcome to the show. Isn't nostalgia amazing? What better way is there to fondly look back at your past while also feeling completely terrible because you realise that you took it all for granted? For instance, do you remember 10 seconds ago when I started making this video? Hiya folks, welcome to the Put away the calculator and stop drawing not elephants on your notebooks because it's time for recess. Easily one of the most iconic animated shows from the late 90s and early 2000s. Before the likes of Kim Possible and Phineas and Ferb premiered, Recess was the most successful Disney cartoon of its time, spawning an entire franchise that lasted 6 seasons, 127 episodes, a theatrical outing, and 3 direct-to-DVD movies and a crossover special all in the span of 9 years. Yet despite the massive success in its heyday, the show really hasn't stuck around like other properties from the 90s, and nowadays really doesn't get talked about a lot, even with it getting reruns until as late as 2011. And since this month marks the 20th anniversary of the franchise's magnum opus, Recess School's Out, what better time is there to look back at this childhood classic and figure out why it hasn't really stuck around? Since this is a 90s show, we can of course start nowhere else but the theme song, since it's one of the few parts of the show people actually remember. Seriously, it's insane how many live recreations of this opening there are out there, but you can totally see why. It starts with a school bell as all the kids excitedly run out of the doors while we hear these brass instruments ramp up in intensity before the drum kicks in. It gives the whole thing this military feel as we see our 6 main characters split up to start carrying out a plan. One thing this opening title sequence does better than most is how it clearly introduces each of the characters' personalities and the world they inhabit. Most of the intro is just us following some kickballs as they travel through the playground where we get brief glimpses into the lives of the various kids, showing this complex, interconnected ecosystem before eventually coming full circle as the main cast are sent to detention. Ending with the sound of a jail cell shutting, demonstrating how inside the school is treated as a prison and the teachers are often characterised as the wardens. Oh, don't worry. That's just the start of how pretentious I can sound. So Recess is a show about recess. Never would have guessed. A majority of the show takes place at 3rd Street Elementary School and follows the lives of the group of 6 friends named TJ, Spinelli, Vince, Gretchen, Mikey and Gus, as they try and bend the rules so they can live recess to the fullest while also having to outsmart the teachers, mainly the strict and diabolical Miss Finster and Principal Prickly. From stealing back confiscated items to protesting against cafeteria menu changes, this show went to some weird but fascinating places. But before we get to all that, why don't we talk about the characters? TJ Detweiler is the level-headed leader of the group who comes up with all the plans and holds his odd group of friends together, while also being able to rally the kids of the playground around various causes. Vince LaSalle is a talented athlete who is incredibly competitive but also self-conscious about how everyone else perceives him. First name redacted Spinelli is the tough muscle of the group with a violent temper but also a sensitive side, as she often uses her strength to stand up for kids who can't defend themselves. Gretchen Grundler on the surface seems like your stereotypical overconfident nerd who is more socially awkward, but there's so much more to her. She's not just your average smart character. She's passionate and hardworking and is able to use her intelligence in various ways that come in handy a lot of the time. Mikey Blumberg is the gentle giant with a sensitive and poetic soul who is often in his own world waxing philosophically to himself, but serves as the moral backbone of the group who often inspires action in everyone around him. He also has a gorgeous baritone singing voice, even if it takes him a while to find the confidence to show everyone. Rounding out the main friends is Gus Griswold, the new kid at 3rd Street who is often the audience stand-in as he is completely clueless about the customs and laws of the playground and often needs them explained to him. Gus is a military brat, having moved around a lot and attending 12 schools in the past 6 years. He's a small and neurotic kid, which makes him an easy target for the bullies of the playground, but also has this dark past and a tendency to go mad with power. Despite him often being called annoying, I personally find him one of the most interesting characters because he easily goes through the most development. Then there are the main antagonists of the series. This cause of many nightmares is Miss Finster, the no-nonsense supervisor of recess who delivers swift and cruel punishments to anyone she labels as a miscreant or a ne'er-do-well. However, she is one of the most nuanced characters on the show, having these shining moments of giving the kids deep life advice and forming a really sweet bond with Spinelli. Then the last major character is Principal Peter Prickly, who often comes off as irritable, cold, and unfair to the kids. And sometimes he is. However, many episodes show he is still very much a kid at heart and truly cares about his students. But those are just the most prominent of the cast. There are so many other kids on the playground and members of the faculty who all get defined personalities. There's Miss Grokey, the 4th grade teacher who often fills her lessons with good vibes and biting social commentary.
Now remember, class, please take this new history book with a grain of salt, since it focuses primarily on the history of white Western males.
There's Randall, the playground snitch who works for Miss Finster. The Diggers, Dave and Sam, who spend all recess tearing up the dirt on the playground. The Ashleys, a clique of vain rich girls who all share the same name. King Bob, who rules over the playground and, depending on the day, is either a tyrannical ruler or a down-to-earth and reasonable guy. Every side character on this show gets multiple episodes that really fleshes them out and gives them depth. And that's not even touching upon all the parent characters. Each episode of this series is 11 minutes, and the stories vary from down to earth to absolutely insane. Yet it still always manages to keep itself grounded. The whole idea of the show is viewing the world from a kid's perspective, so it sort of exists in this hyper reality where they're allowed to get away with some fantastical elements here and there. One of the big running themes of this show is the difficulties of growing up and all the pressure kids are put under in this odd age where they're starting to ask questions and understand how the world works, but are still just starting that journey of figuring themselves out. Episodes deal with the kids confronting new ideas or worrying about their future, and occasionally the show gets really deep. Before we move on, I'd like to just quickly go over some episodes of the series that really stand out to me, and I feel would give anyone unfamiliar with the show a good impression of its best elements. Rainy Days. When recess gets cancelled due to rain, the kids become haunted by a legend of a storm that lasted for several days that made all the students go crazy until they eventually succumbed to the boredom of the indoors and became zombies. This is one of the funniest episodes in the series, from the way all the characters are slowly driven to madness, and it gives you some downright diabolical Finster moments as she revels in the kids' spirits slowly being broken. Gus's last stand. Gus becomes the latest target for the playground's resident bully, Gelman, and will do anything to make it stop. This is a very simple episode. There's no big heist and not even a lot of funny dialogue, but I have never seen a show be so brutally honest about the nature of bullying, and it's one of Gus's strongest showings, even if he is looking a little worse for wear by the end. The economics of recess. When TJ returns to school after being ill, he learns the playground now runs on the currency of monstickers, meaning he can't afford to do anything. He starts working to make a living for himself, but then begins outsourcing jobs and paying his workers a fraction of what he's earning. Until eventually TJ controls all the wealth of the playground, leading to inflation, meaning none of the other kids can afford anything. Yes, this is an episode of a Disney show about the evils of capitalism, which, ignoring the irony in that, is just a phenomenal episode of television. That stinking feeling. Spinella gets her first crush, which causes everyone on the playground to start treating her differently, which sends her into an existential crisis, thinking her life as she knew it is over. I'm mentioning this one for what is hands down the best Miss Finster moment of the show, where she comforts Spinella in the most painfully honest way possible and gives one of my favourite speeches in anything ever.
Love? Ugh, my life is over.
Oh, that's where you're wrong, kiddo. This is just the beginning. From now on, you're gonna be faced with feelings like this every day. Feelings that are gonna make you want to stand on the rooftop and yell to the heavens. Feelings that are gonna want to make you crawl into a hole and pull off your skin. But even if he does leave you in Paris with no money and a broken axle on the VW, in the end, it's all worth it. Because it's better to feel something than nothing at all.
All the principal's men. The gang seek to uncover what they feel may turn into a government-wide conspiracy as every ball in the playground is taken away. I love this episode because I am an immature child.
Listen up! By order of the Board of Education, effective immediately, all balls at 3rd Street School will be returned to the school district. So drop them if you got them.
Why are they taking all our balls?
I have no comment on the removal of the balls.
Playground without balls? But that's crazy!
You hear about this kind of thing happening other places, but you never figure it's gonna happen to you.
Easy, little lady. Just use your noggin. Seems to me if you ask the right questions, you'll be crawling in balls in no time. All right, sir, let's hear it. Why were the balls taken, and when do we get them back?
A new set? Great. Now that's 2 sets of missing balls.
Sir, if you did order new balls, I assume you have some proof?
Recess quickly became one of the most successful shows Disney had ever produced, And like with all remotely popular cartoons from the 90s and early 2000s, it would inevitably make the jump to the big screen. And in 2001, we were given Recess Schools Out, one huge theatrical adventure to end it all. And then it didn't. So where do you go with a movie based on a show about 9-year-old adventures on the playground? Naturally here. Yeah, this movie is contentious among fans to say the least, with its sharp detour from a simple, good-natured show about adolescence to a James Bond-style plot with ninjas, evil lasers, and a whole lot of James Woods. But how do I feel about this movie? Well, as someone with terrible opinions would say, I like it. I mean, when you actually look at some of the more out there episodes of the show, the plot of this movie really doesn't seem that far-fetched. But speaking of the plot, what is it? It's the last day of school as the characters celebrate graduating from the 4th grade. TJ is excited to spend summer vacation with his friends, only to learn all 5 of them are going away to various summer camps, as they are now considered pre-young adults and thus feel they have to start thinking about their futures. Leaving TJ all alone as basically every relevant kid character on the show is also going to a camp, which, okay. But everything changes when TJ notices something strange going on in the school, because as it turns out, this guy, Phil, played by James Woods, wants to change the moon's rotation, thus turning summer into winter, as he feels if kids are kept indoors, they'll study more and cause test scores to go up. Yes, it's stupid. But I mean, it's James Woods, so it ends up really working, especially when you start getting into his backstory and motivations. So now TJ must gather all his friends, find out what's going on, and figure out some way to save Summer. From all that, this sounds like a weird movie. And yeah, it is. But it fully embraces how bizarre it gets, giving it this great energy which really helps the movie feel like so much more than just an extended episode of the series. However, all that stuff that made Recess special is still here. You still have all these diverse characters with very distinct personalities, and the movie carries on all the themes from the show. In fact, I'd say they are more prevalent in this movie than they are in any episodes of the series. There is this absolutely beautiful scene in the middle of the movie right before all the action goes down, where the gang are all sitting in TJ's treehouse and reflecting on their previous summers together, all while realizing their childhoods are almost over, before they all start singing together in this wonderful display of their friendship. While it's a little more out there and at times does feel rather generic, Schools Out still very much has the same heart that made the series so special. Then it also perfectly closes out so many of the long-running arcs on the show. TJ and Principal Prickly find some common ground and really grow to understand each other, as TJ gets to see his principal as a person who was just like him once. And likewise, Prickly is able to reconnect with his past and remember why he wanted to go into teaching in the first place. Then there's the fact Gus gets his chance to step up and show he has what it takes to be a leader, and basically every character you want to see gets a moment or two to shine. Then who could forget the scene where the teachers show up to help the kids, creating this common ground between two groups that were always at odds with each other on the show. Sure, the visuals didn't receive that much of an upgrade, but it almost doesn't matter because the writing of this movie is so strong. And while it has some rocky patches here and there, Recess Schools Out overall manages to be a very enjoyable film, with a lot of fan service that manages to tie in most of the themes of the show and conclude them in a very satisfying end to one of Disney's greatest shows. Or at least it should have been. So as fate would have it, Recess Schools Out did beyond anyone's expectations, and against a $23 million budget made back $44.5 million, which to put that in perspective is almost $10 million more than a Goofy movie made. Of course, Disney couldn't just let something like that go, so they did the rational thing and ordered another season, before immediately changing their minds and making 3 direct-to-DVD movies instead. Okay, first on the chopping block, we have Recess Christmas Miracle on 3rd Street, released in November 2001. It takes place shortly after the Christmas special of the series, Yes Mikey, Santa Does Shave, as Miss Grotke, Principal Prickly and Miss Finster all get trapped in a car together by a snowbank, which the latter two immediately blame TJ and his friends for, only for Miss Grotke to try and convince the two that they aren't bad kids by reminding them of all the times they've gotten along in the past. Yep, this is a package film, as it includes the episodes Principal for a Day, The Great Can Drive, Weekend at Muriel's, and Yes Mikey, Santa Does Shave. Now, normally I would rip a movie like this to shreds, but I mean, it has 4 of the show's best episodes, and what little new content content there is actually pretty good. It's nice we get an entire movie that heavily features Miss Groke, as she barely shows up in the last two direct-to-DVD movies. Honestly, I'm kind of okay just grouping this in with Recess's Golden Age, as I feel it does have some of that same spark, even if it is overall forgettable. All Growed Down is the worst Recess movie. Despite the fact the franchise was on its deathbed and Gus, Mikey and Vince's voices all changed despite keeping the same actors, they decided to move on to TJ's third voice actor, who, I'm sorry, sounds nothing like TJ, which is why from now on I'm going to be calling him Imposter TJ. This whole movie just feels so off. And outside of the fact it's another package film and features some great episodes of the show, this doesn't feel like Recess. This feels like a cheap-ass webtoon version of Recess that in its entire runtime made me laugh exactly once.
Hello there, small people.
Anyway, what's the story? While trying to play a game of croquet, Imposter TJ, Spinelli, Vince, Gretchen and Mikey get captured by the kindergartners. We learn the kindergartner crown has been usurped by this charming young man who believes the big kids are bad and should be punished. So Imposter TJ and the gang have to convince him they are friends to the kindergartners by telling them stories. Those stories being The Legend of Big Kid, Wild Child and Kindergarten Derby. But is there anything good in this movie? Well, I'm not sure I'd go that far, but the closest it gets to being enjoyable is in the final act, when Gus shows up and gets tied up with everyone only to tell them the story of when he was in kindergarten, when he moved to 3rd Street for a day before moving away again the next one. I love it when shows try to desperately cling to their continuity while simultaneously destroying it. It's fun. This technically counts as a new episode, and as far as Recess episodes go, it's okay. The animation is much closer to the quality of the show, it has a little of that classic Recess charm, especially when we get to the breakout, and I'll admit there's some novelty in seeing all the characters when they were much younger. Plus, this is the only part of the movie to heavily feature Miss Finster. However, this movie is still the most forgettable and cheap thing to ever come out of this franchise. I have never seen a direct-to-DVD Disney movie have animation that is this bad. The only times it felt like Recess is when it's just showing old episodes. There's nothing horrible in it, but it is exceptionally mediocre compared to the standard of quality this franchise had become known for. And the final direct-to-DVD movie was entitled Taking the 5th Grade. Remember earlier when I said how after School's Out that originally Disney had ordered another season before quickly changing their minds? Well, they took the 3 episodes they had already completed and mashed it all together to create a series finale of sorts. Yeah, we have a Cinderella to Atlantis situation of cobbling together completed episodes of a cancelled TV series and trying to pass it off as a movie. However, considering that these were all meant to be new episodes in a new season of Recess, it is remarkably better than All Grow Down, even if it is still overall a lackluster finale, but we'll get to that. The first act of the movie is called No More School. Summer has ended as Imposter TJ and his friends have now entered the 5th grade and are excited to reap all the benefits that come with that, only to find out Miss Finster is their teacher, the cafeteria menu has changed, and just when things can't get any worse, the entire playground gets taken away and paved over. So Imposter TJ decides he's going to lock himself in his room to protest these new changes. From there, there's a lot of chaos and continuity as Principal Prickly and TJ are trying to see the situation from each other's perspective. This is the best part of the movie because it's the only part that is a genuine follow-up to School's Out, building on the understanding TJ and Prickly found as Prickly has to decide if he'll stand up for the kids and risk losing his job. We also get, as I said, some really nice callbacks to the series with the return of Mr. White. The second story is the 5th and 6th graders club, which is easily the weakest part of the movie. Following on from the events of No More School, Imposter TJ and his friends are invited into the 5th and 6th graders club, a club which is exclusive to guess who. In the club, rivalries don't exist as all the kids are suddenly able to get along with their enemies. However, Mikey and Gus get a little carried away, developing an addiction to the club as they start treating the younger kids as lower class citizens, forcing the rest of the gang to try and snap them out of it. This whole part is just okay. The only notable thing is the end of this episode features the return of King Bob, whom Imposter TJ calls to help them. And the final part of the movie is titled A Recess Halloween. Spinelli starts to believe she's too old for Halloween and decides to stay home, only for her spirit to be revived thanks to trick-or-treaters. So she decides to join her friends, who have also started to suspect the magic of Halloween is gone for them too. So Spinelli decides to take them to a supposedly haunted house. Now, as a Recess episode on its own, it's pretty good, but as a series finale, wow is this underwhelming. It does kind of fit since it does focus on the theme of growing up and gives us a nice payoff to Spinelli and Miss Finster's relationship, but it really has nothing else going for it outside of that. When looking at the movie in full, if you squint really hard, you might be able to see how this could be a decent finale. No more school acting as a send-off to the teachers and Principal Prickly, the 5th and 6th grader club acting as a send-off for the kids at the playground, and a recess Halloween kind of acting as a send-off for the main characters. The only issue is, School's Out not only did those things far better, but was a much more coherent and satisfying movie that felt like a culmination of everything the show was building up to. But Disney just dragged it out for 2 more years until there was very little of what made the show so special left. And with the release of Taking the 5th Grade, the Recess franchise basically went out on a whimper. Even though the direct-to-DVD movies were unnecessary, they didn't really do much in the long term to damage the show's legacy, so Disney didn't completely run this franchise into the ground. Right. Then 3 years later they made a crossover special with Lilo and Stitch. For a network infamous for only letting their shows last a couple of years, they sure wanted to kill off Recess as slowly as possible, didn't they? I'm sure we all remember the Lilo and Stitch crossover specials. For the 2nd season of the series, they crossed over with 4 other popular Disney shows: American Dragon, The Proud Family, Kim Possible, and Recess. One of these things is not like the other. Ignoring the fact, I don't know how anyone could have possibly thought having a spin-off of a very popular Disney movie have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 crossovers with shows that have drastically different art styles and gives the viewers way more questions than answers, let's talk about the fact this is obviously a cross-promotion with these shows. So why the hell would you do a crossover to promote a show that hasn't aired a new episode in 5 years? Especially when that show is about kids' lives on the playground. Now you're telling me they exist in the same universe as Gantu? Not to mention how much this messes with the timeline. The Recess TV series takes place from 1998 to 1999, and you're just going to have them randomly show up in a show which takes place anywhere from 2002 to 2005. Okay, what is the story? Experiment 285 is activated and has the power to make people stop working, which Stitch gets zapped with. Lilo then randomly runs into imposter TJ, Vince, Mikey, Spinelli, Gretchen, and imposter Gus. Yep, guess who got a new voice actor who sounds nothing like the character? Which makes no sense, because Vince and Mikey's voices have both changed drastically, yet it's still the same actors. They're in Hawaii because Gretchen believes she may have discovered a new planet, which, believe it or not, is the most plausible thing to happen to these characters in this episode, as each one of them slowly becomes victims of the experiment. I'll give the episode some credit. The characters here are animated so much better than they were in the direct-to-DVD movies. I also do like the fact it focuses mostly on my favourite character, Gretchen. We even get to see Galileo again, which is Gretchen's pocket supercomputer that can answer any question and search the internet. Basically, Recess predicted smartphones. Even though it doesn't make any sense by any means and causes a lot of problems, the episode is still far more enjoyable than any of the direct-to-DVD movies. And as of right now, that's the end of Recess. It's kinda sad thinking about the last few years of this amazing series. How this unique, well-written show that really explored what it means to grow up turned into cheap, generic direct-to-DVD movies and a confusing crossover special years after the show lost most of its relevance. So, in seeing what happened to this show, I'm no longer confused about why it hasn't really stuck around and isn't held in the same regard as other animated shows of that era. But its prolonged, merciless death is not what I'll remember this show for. I'll remember all the inventive stories, the efforts it took to give all its characters depth, the way the show captured a child's view of the world in a way no other series has ever been able to replicate. And most of all, I'll remember how it never talked down to kids and treated their problems and opinions seriously. Every now and then we hear some rumblings about a live-action adaptation or some kind of reboot of the series, and while what I'd personally love to see is a spin-off focusing on the next generation with some of the kids now as the teachers, I'm kind of okay just letting this franchise rest in peace, because we'll always have those 6 amazing seasons and the movie that brought it all together in a satisfying conclusion. Thanks for watching, folks. See you real soon.